Good afternoon, friends. It's a pleasure to be back in the afternoons with an author. Today, as we are aware, we had another session today, the memory of everlasting things, but we've had a last minute change. And I'm so glad that we have with us today Mr. AK Bhattacharya and Mr. T K Arun. And we'll be discussing this wonderful book on India's finance ministers from 1947 to 1977. Uh, the pleasure is from my side is really extreme because all three of us are ex-economic times, though we worked at different points of time in the economic times. When I was in the economic times from 82 to 85, Mr. Bhattacharya was there in the late 80s and early 90s, and TK, of course, went on to become the editor there. So, friends, without much ado, TK has been my contemporary and my colleague at JNU, and he's risen to great heights as a journalist. Together, we did some ET programs for attracting investment to Uttarakhand. And Mr. Bhattacharya is a very well-known feature writer, now currently with Business Standard. He's ex-Hindu College. The two of us are ex-JNU. So, friends, what we'll do is in our usual format, I'll ask Mr. Bhattacharya to tell us about why he wrote this book and how he wrote this book and the time that he took, the materials that he drew upon, and then Mr. Arun will quiz him on all the finance ministers of the country. I'll add my two bits on CD Deshmukh because he's an ex ICS officer and somebody I've been very fond of. He's a very inspirational figure. And I just also wanted to acknowledge that this is supported by by our supporters: Green Panel, Coal India, Incredible India, Cello, REC, Garhwal Post. So these are all the people that we need to thank for making it possible for us to have this program. So, Mr. Bhattacharya, tell us about this book. It's got a wonderful reception. It's got some lovely reviews. So maybe you could like to hold up the book and show everyone that this is the book we are talking about. TK, if you have a copy, you can hold it up. But
I don't have a physical copy.
You don't have this copy. You have the internet copy. Fine. Yeah. So over to you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Tell us about the story of this book.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. It's always been a pleasure interacting with you. We last met, if you remember, in the Bhopal Book Festival when my first book appeared, On the Rise of Goliath. We had a wonderful discussion. I remember at that hotel where we all stayed, and very fond memories of that. So thank you very much for hosting me this occasion. Coming to your question on why I wrote this book on India's finance ministers, the fact of the matter is that once I was in the finance minister's office recently, and I found that the finance minister's room, for the first time in the last 74 years or so, had a board that displayed the names of the finance ministers from 47 onwards. And having covered the finance ministry for several decades from 1985 onwards as a journalist, I have always used to wonder that every minister's room you go in, you see the previous minister's names. But when you enter the finance minister's room, it's a huge room, but there's no list of the finance ministers. So I asked the finance minister that, how did you decide to have this? And then she told me that, even to get this board made was a Herculean task, because getting the details of the finance ministers of the past and the correct details from which date to what date was something that required some effort. And that triggered in my mind this thought that, if the government itself is finding it difficult to put together their list of finance ministers, I mean, it was an exaggeration, I'm sure, from the finance minister's side. And I thought that why not try to unravel the story of these finance ministers in the last 74 years. It was 74 years then, now it has become almost 76 years. My project, and then I got to my publishers, Penguin, and I broached this idea with them. They, of course, had a different view. They said that why not make it in one volume? Because obviously the marketability of the book gets better if you only look at some of the key finance ministers. So my argument was that it is important to record for posterity what different eras of India's economic history after independence saw their finance ministers perform, and their equation with the prime minister, their role in various economic policies, not just the fiscal policy, but even in trade policy and industrial policies. And I thought I was going to plug a gap of sorts in recounting this story without being judgmental. I think that is something that I told myself that is easy to be judgmental, and I thought that I would rather be more like a chronicler, with of course my observations, but those observations will be more or less restricted to some adjectives that will define the verbs, and nothing more and nothing less. That's how I went about it. And the book is in actually in three volumes. The first volume is what we showed right now, Mr. Chopra. The second volume would be coming in January, and third volume most probably when a new government after the elections come out with its first budget. So that is the sequence right now. And in this volume, I have looked at 11 finance ministers, and one criterion that I've chosen is that I have tried to focus on finance ministers who have presented budgets, in a sense that, for example, people don't even know that a person called Nalini Ranjan Sarkar was finance minister for although for about 30 days or so. So I have excluded finance ministers who did not present a budget. By the same logic, I've included even prime ministers who chose to be finance ministers even for a short while. But if they presented the budget, they did get featured. And I realized that I will not be, losing out on any important prime minister who acted as the finance minister, because the only prime minister who acted firmly as a finance minister without presenting a budget was Manmohan Singh in 2007-8. After the 26/11 attacks, he became the finance minister along with being a prime minister without presenting a budget, but he took some important steps in addressing India's financial. But that is in the third volume. Coming to this volume, I focus on 11 finance ministers who presented as many as 30 budgets. And some of the key things that I found is that the equation between the finance ministers and the prime minister is worth noting, which we can discuss when we come to Arun. And it's a and another thing which struck me was that the finance ministers in those 30 years were probably more independent and more firm in their stance on whether to stay in the job or whether to continue doing the same job, even if they had a major difference of opinion with the party or with their prime minister. I mean, that is what probably is something that is a running theme in the first 30 years. I will stop there.
Yeah.
But before Arun starts, we must tell you that the current finance minister has been our contemporary in JNU.
Yes.
Nirmala ji has worked. I mean, Nirmala ji,
Yes.
she was a student when I don't want to use the word Nirmala ji because we never called her Nirmala ji at the time. We just called her Nirmala. So I think we'll take the.
She was an activist with free thinkers.
Huh? Yes,
she was an
very
activist with free thinkers.
Yes,
the free thinkers of the party at that time.
Yeah.
She campaigned for me in the 82-83 elections.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a different story. Over to you, Arun.
Yeah. So quite a remarkable book, AKB.
Thank
Even
you.
for people who routinely cover the finance ministry and think of India's economic problems, there are nuggets of insight and information which are extremely novel and useful. For example, as you said, the independence of finance ministers is marked by the first finance minister, Shanmugam Chetty's budget speech, where he begins by saying that India got independence as a result of the shift in world affairs and the goodwill of native rulers, without mentioning the Congress or the freedom movement.
Yes.
Yeah. It is quite remarkable that such a speech should have been allowed to be made by a finance minister of the first independent government of India, right? I mean, it's a far cry today where you sing the prime minister's praise and every bit their speech reflects the political priorities of the ruling party. What do
No,
you think? Did you strike you?
yeah, I think it's a very important point that you mentioned. Shanmugam Shetty was not, as you will find in that chapter on Shanmugam Shetty, he was not from the Congress party, and he was there for because of difference of opinion between the Home Minister and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was keen on John Mathai because he was the finance member in the pre-independence that government that was in place. But Patel was very unhappy with John Mathai for having introduced some fiscal proposals, tax proposals to be precise, which Patel believed that was harming or affecting the interest of some Gujarati
Yes.
industry.
Yeah.
And I think so when John Mathai was not found acceptable by Patel, although Nehru batted for him, so they had to find a compromise candidate in Shanmugam Shetty, uh, who was a professor, he was a teacher, he was a Diwan of Cochin, many things into one, but not a member of the Congress party. So that's something which is very, very important to note, that those days, the first three finance ministers actually were not member of the Congress to begin with.
Yeah. Plus, I found that you mentioned that Gandhi had suggested Chetty as finance minister. It was quite
Yes.
remarkable that Gandhi was supposed to be so distant from affairs of state and power, had actually found the time to suggest a particular person as finance minister.
Yeah, yeah. And Chetty is a man who signed the Ottawa Pact, and the Ottawa Pact was what eventually laid the foundations of the Bretton Woods institutions. So that way, Shetty has an international image and a reputation and status, and probably Gandhi saw that you needed a finance minister. Doesn't matter he belongs to the Congress or not, but he has a status and a standing in the international community who will be able to steer the finances of the country.
And another thing that I found striking was that the Nehru government devoted 48% of the total government expenditure to defense. I mean, can you imagine today any government being able to devote that large a proportion of total expenditure to defense? I mean, there were the exigencies of the situation, but still, that was a priority one would have never associated with independent India.
That's true. Very, very true. I mean, the partition. If you look at even the partition outlays, they were huge because they realized that the government realized that it would be uh, improper and not prudent if you don't allocate enough to build your defense forces and at the same time address the partition issues.
No, but I must come in at this stage as a non-economist and as somebody who looks at political history. You see, I think that there was no way in which the outlays on defense could have been reduced. And as far as the British government was concerned, remember those were the years of the World War. Those were the years of the post-World War years. So I mean, the demobilization of forces could not have happened, and there was a lot of expenditure that had to happen on the army. So it's only after a period of time that you could demobilize more troops because most of this money went into payment of salaries and pensions and all these things. So I think there was not much leeway. This leeway can happen only after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, in the 47 budget or the 48 budget, if you have an army which was the biggest employer at that time, I mean, you can't suddenly, reduce the salaries, you can't reduce the thing. So their priorities as far as rehabilitation is concerned, and as far as army is concerned, those I think were situations of the time over which no prime minister or no finance minister could have had any degree of control, and that's the way I would look at it when I look
Yeah.
at the political history of India. So
Fair point. See, another thing that struck me is this fact that actual actions of the government under Nehru defy the notion that he was actually trying to build any socialistic pattern in this country. The Nehru government set up IFCI in 1949. The whole purpose was to mobilize the public savings and give it as long-term loans to private industry.
Yeah.
Soon afterward, they set up ICICI with the intent of mobilizing the public savings and channeling it to this term lending institution and fund small-scale industry. Thereafter, shortly before he died, the cabinet passed the resolution, the Nehru cabinet, to set up the IDBI. So the whole concerted effort to channel the public savings deposited with banks towards term lending institutions that would supply capital to private industry, it doesn't indicate any aversion to private investment or aversion or any desire to prop up any socialist sector. It's shown an intent to promote private industry and private investment and take them forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you that there was this trend and there was this thought in the Nehru era, which was endorsed by his finance ministers, that you must create institutions by which investment could be channeled into and money funds could be channeled into the private sector for investments. So there is no doubt about it that. But to buttress your point further, I would say that this notion earlier that Nehru government, that the Nehru as prime minister or the finance minister at that time would only focus on big industries, but not on consumer goods industries, is actually also not very correct. If you look at the way they looked at private sector initiatives in those early years after independence, I mean, there's this classic case of a proposal coming from Ponds to set up a face cream unit in the country. And T K Krishnamachari was at that time not the finance minister but the industry minister. But he referred the case because the proposal came from his family. So he recused himself and referred the case to C.D. Deshmukh. Mr. Chopra, your finance minister.
yeah, no,
So,
everyone's finance minister.
so he sent it to C.D. Deshmukh, and Deshmukh took that proposal and sent it to Nehru and said that this is the proposal that has come from the industry minister with his no comment because of his conflict of interest. But Nehru was in two minds. It was face cream, which was the consumer goods industry. Would he approve it instead of build the Bhakra Nangal and the steel plants? But C. Rajagopalachari was opposed to the idea because he believed that we should not go in for this kind of investment at this stage. Scarce resources must be used for big industries. But Nehru took a very, very clear stance. He said that you do need a plant to produce face cream, even a small thing as face cream. And Rajagopalachari objected because Rajagopalachari said that Sita did never needed face creams. So why do we need to set up a plant, in this country? So Nehru's response to Rajagopalachari, which was communicated to C.D. Deshmukh, was that Sita was an exquisitely beautiful woman. She did not need a face cream, but large number of Indian women are not as beautiful, may not be as beautiful as Sita. So they may need face creams. So let us go ahead with this. So what I'm saying is this, this belief that Nehru only wanted Bhakra Nangal Dam and HEC and various other big steel plants, and it is not true. He also was open to setting up and promoting private initiatives. Of course, there was the nationalization of Air India and Imperial Bank, but those were specific instances, but not part of his overall policy. Yes, of course, Industrial Policy Resolution was there, IDR Act of 1951 was there, licensing was introduced. But in approach, I cannot see that Nehru was opposed to private investment in general.
Yeah. I mean, he did not, after all, nationalize Tata Steel, which was India's
Yes,
major steel producing factory.
absolutely.
He left the manufacture of cars to private industry.
Yes,
It was not part of the state sector. In fact, all he used his state investment was to create the wherewithal for the private sector to promote, build its own industry, power, infrastructure. All these things were developed in the state sector so that this could be come into handy as inputs to the production activity of the private sector.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
As
Arun,
also,
Now,
I wanted to before you leave Shetty and move on to the other finance ministers, I wanted to draw your attention. You must have gone through that section. Is that why Shanmugam Chetty left the government?
yes,
It it is quite an interesting development. I mean, you know how how particular the finance minister was. I mean, he did not, was not involved in any financial impropriety. Just that he gave his income tax department certain powers to exempt launching investigations into certain cases just before the law was changed. Now, on that issue alone, in which nothing was found to be wrong, but Parliament, Parliament's control or Parliament's sovereignty was challenged to some extent. That you did something through an executive decision to escape a provision that will be introduced through an amendment in the law.
yeah,
On
it's
that
quite
issue
remarkable.
alone, on
Yeah,
that issue alone, he
but
decided to quit.
that was more because Nehru wanted to assert himself, and
Absolutely.
I think it was that aspect. It was nothing to do because I mean there have been many indiscretions insofar
Yeah.
as several decisions have been taken in that cabinet, which had not been. I mean there were several decisions that have been taken by prime ministers without reference to the.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a subject for another
Yeah.
book on India's home ministers. You created the
Yeah.
Indian Frontier Administrative Service. We did
Yeah.
so many other things. You put Sikkim under the Ministry of External Affairs without cabinet authority. So that's another chapter altogether. But I think we've already spent 24 minutes, and I think Arun, we need to move slightly ahead because
yeah,
we've covered
yeah.
too many of them, right?
Yeah. Now, see, the only flaw with approaching India's economic history by examining the record of our finance ministers is that some things were done outside the finance ministry. Like, for example, the Green Revolution or Operation Flood. Uh, these were both carried out by a man who subsequently became the finance minister, that is Chidambaram Subramanian.
Yeah.
But this was done long before his stint as finance minister, while he was the Minister of Agriculture under Shastri and Indira Gandhi. Now, so, and there are many other things which probably would not have actually taken place under the imprimatur of the finance minister, but were equally significant for building the Indian economy and taking it forward. What do you say, AKB?
Yeah, I see your point, I mean, Green Revolution is certainly one such instance. I would add post 1973, the oil shock, the domestic oil development, exploration development was a major initiative, and these were not taken by the finance ministers. They were taken by, at that time, as you rightly pointed out, Chidambaram Subramanian was the agriculture minister who took the initiative. But I thought that, I was not directly, I wanted to focus on the finance ministers, what they did, number one. Number two, where finance ministers were directly involved. I mean, for example, when Morarji Desai was the finance minister, there were a flurry of bank closures, bank shutdowns. The Palai Central Bank collapse in Kerala. Now that gets featured because Morarji Desai had a direct involvement in the sense that he made sure that the bank management are brought to book, and those banks are either taken over by some other banks or some social control of banks policies are introduced. So I think I have deliberately kept policies, important economic policies, which were not directly dealt with by the finance ministers for obvious reason, because the scope of the book was only on the finance ministers. But as you rightly pointed out, that the Green Revolution, as well as the oil sector, the exploration policy, some of these policies were kept out. But by the same yardstick, I mean, bank nationalization is covered because it is done by the finance minister at that time, who Indira Gandhi became the finance minister to nationalize the banks, because Morarji Desai was not this thing. So I think you are right that I could not have focused on so many things. So
similarly, you could add coal nationalization to that list of things
true.
which took place
Absolutely.
outside the finance ministry.
Yeah.
Which
Even
to this
textile
day
nationalization.
affects.
There's
That's
one
right.
question I have for you, AKB. That is about the structural fight between the Planning Commission and the Finance Ministry. Of course, it was announced by the second finance minister. He didn't want to do it. But tell us about how the relationship between the Planning Commission and the Finance Ministry and the PMO and the individual ministers was panning out, because that's when Chidambaram Subramanian's, he was also very upset that the Planning Commission is not allowing the Green Revolution to come through. So, what role do you actually see the Planning Commission in retrospect? Of course, hindsight is the best side, so we can be very critical of an institution which no longer exists. But because you've been covering this from from a long time, so how do you look at this relationship between the Planning Commission and the Finance Ministry?
Well, when it was decided that there would be a planning commission, I think the finance minister was obviously upset. John Mathai was upset because he saw the planning commission as an institution that will undermine the sovereignty, so to say, of the finance ministry in deciding on financial policies, fiscal policies, and financial allocations. And he wanted a clear enunciation of the guardrails or the defining the powers of the planning commission. And Nehru's argument was that this is not a statutory body. This is a body that is set up through a cabinet resolution. So it will only help you in implementing your economic policies of the government. But Mathai obviously was not very happy about it. He went along with And a very interesting point is that the original draft of, of the planning commission before it went to the cabinet was prepared by a man who was hired by John Mathai to be India's financial ambassador. That is C.D. Deshmukh, who had stepped down as the RBI governor, and he was hired, who else but by John Mathai only, to say that you become India's financial ambassador. Because C.D. Deshmukh, unfortunately, had lost his wife, who was a Britisher.
And that, yes, yes.
As a matter of fact, he had decided to relocate himself in UK along with his wife. But before he could land in London, he was told that his wife died of a massive heart attack, and so then and there he decided to pack up his bags and come back. So the point I'm making is this, that it was C.D. Deshmukh's draft that led to the formation of the Planning Commission, which John Mathai was uncomfortable with, and he decided to put in his papers on that issue itself. But remember that Nehru did not accept his resignation for more than 2 months. And actually, I have looked at John Mathai's correspondence, and it is there in the book, wherein John Mathai got this impression that probably Nehru has ignored his resignation and he will continue as a finance minister. But Nehru, being Nehru, he was looking out for a replacement, and he was negotiating with C.D. Deshmukh. And when he got Deshmukh to say yes, but Deshmukh had this one question to Nehru. Deshmukh asked Nehru that, I am the man who drafted that cabinet resolution for your planning commission, and it is the planning commission which has led to the resignation of your current finance minister. Now, is it unethical for me to take charge of the finance ministry at this point in time? But Nehru brushed aside these issues and said, come along and join me. So Deshmukh finally joined. So I'm saying is this, that those Nehru years, the early years, were full of drama of this nature, and it happened.
So, of all the finance ministers you cover,
Yeah,
excluding Prime Minister Nehru and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, it would seem that C.D. Deshmukh was the most consequential finance minister. Would you agree?
I entirely agree with you. He was the most consequential for a few reasons, couple of reasons. One, C.D. Deshmukh is the first finance minister who laid the foundations of organizational foundation of the finance ministry. The office of a chief economic advisor did not exist before he became the finance minister. A strong statistical division in the country was Deshmukh's idea, who, in consultation with Shanta Mahalanobis, he persuaded Mahalanobis, and Nehru, of course, helped him to join and give up that he was with ISS. Then they created the NSS, and they were made part of it. So Mahalanobis was involved in the statistics division in a big way, and it was Deshmukh's initiative, of course, helped by Nehru. Number three, he set up those institutions. Things like ICICI, IDBI, and finally, as a RBI governor, he was opposed to the idea of changing the ownership of Imperial Bank of India. But as a finance minister, when he looked at it from the position as the finance minister of the country, he endorsed the idea, and Venegal Ramarao, who was the RBI governor at this point in time, who had to listen to his predecessor, and Imperial Bank of India was nationalized and became State Bank of India. So I think he did a lot of this work, and finally he laid the foundations for setting up the finance commissions. The first finance commission was set up under the initiative of C.D. Deshmukh. So, in spite of his, you know, introducing licensing, raising tariffs, which became controversial later on, or even launching investigations against Dalmias, which became controversial. So Deshmukh also had his controversies associated with his rule, but I think Deshmukh contributed the most among those finance ministers, of course, barring Mrs. Gandhi and to some extent Nehru. Nehru, I am not that confident because Nehru's budget was actually T.P. Krishnamachari's budget. He did not do much except introducing the gift tax. The gift tax that we see today is Nehru's contribution. But it was TTK's idea because TTK was fond of introducing many taxes. So he got expenditure tax, which fortunately got abolished in a few years later. He introduced the idea of the gift tax was his, but Nehru implemented it because T.T. Krishnamachari had to resign in the wake of the Mundra scandal.
Mundra. Now, let me ask you something which is contemporary. Now, you write with the power of hindsight.
Yeah.
You constantly refer to what happened later under Manmohan Singh. You
Yeah.
refer to what happened under Yashwant Sinha, because you are writing with the advantage of being able to see things from the perspective of subsequent developments. Now, if you look at what happened in Britain in the wake of the budget presented by the shortest lived prime minister for the country, do you still think that the central bank should be completely autonomous from the government? Or do you think there should be proper coordination between the central bank and the fiscal policies of the government in order for the economy and the financial system to be stable and for that stability to add to rather than take away from macroeconomic stability?
Well, there is no, you have asked me a question to which there can be only one answer. I mean, there is no doubt that the RBI, as the head of the monetary policy, and the government, the finance ministry, as the head of the fiscal policy, must work in tandem. They have to have coordinated action. But unfortunately, that was not the case even in the first 30 years after independence. As a matter of fact, even Nehru has been guilty of taking the side of his finance minister T.D. Krishnamachari when the latter fought with the RBI governor and actually led to the resignation of the first resignation, no, not the first, but the second resignation, the first resignation of RBI governor in independent India, of the longest serving RBI governor. Benegal Ramarao still remains the longest serving RBI governor. And he had to quit because he was ticked off by Nehru, no one else, for adopting a central bank resolution that challenged the finance minister's action on introducing a tax that infringed upon the effective administration of monetary policy in the country. So his view was that if you take certain decisions, then you are undermining the effective and efficient administration of monetary policy. And he got the central bank board to adopt a resolution against that. And that resolution was sent to the finance minister. So T.T. Krishnamachari was a clever finance minister. He simply forwarded that to the prime minister, Nehru. And Nehru told Benegal Ramarao directly that please remember that RBI is only an arm of the government. So, today you have governors who say that RBI is an autonomous body, but RBI has the right to say so because of the finance ministry has given him the power. But it was Nehru who actually, laid it down so clearly that RBI will have to work under the overall guidance of the finance ministry. So while in principle the coordination is very important, but I don't think that this was the case in the first 30 years, and I don't think this has been the case since then even.
Yeah. That while you progress along the decades after independence, you will see the tax rates levied by the government on income steadily go up. You describe how the rate was as low as 6%, 6.25%, and
Yes,
then
yes.
during the emergence we come up to 97.5%. So
Well,
how do you see the evolution? What are the compulsions?
I think one was that the revenue raising requirements very clear, and I think at that point in time, the alcohol that was being taxed was not the ones that were produced in the country, that was largely imported. And I think as India grew its domestic capacity to produce more alcohol within the country, the tax rates, because it was considered to be a sin good, so it was progressively raised. So I am not at all surprised. What I am surprised is how the income tax rates were gradually raised to a point of 97.7% by 70s, and there was not much discussion, or there was not much deliberation by the finance ministers in the first 30 years that how the income tax rate has gone up. And as a matter of fact, when YB Chavan started reducing the rates in his four budgets, unfortunately, the Bangladesh war and then the crisis held his hand somewhat, but he started the process of reducing their duties, income tax rate particularly. So those are things which have happened in these 30 years, and it's a fascinating journey actually.
Yeah. The 70s, in terms of economic growth, was the most disastrous decade for India. The growth rate was the lowest. Uh, the macroeconomic imbalance was the most severe. Now, to what extent is this a contribution of the Bangladesh liberation war and India's role in it? Or to what extent is imprudent fiscal policy? Or how do you
Well,
apportion the.
I somehow feel that the Bangladesh war did create pressure on the central finances. There's no doubt about it. But and the government's finances were strained. Inflation was rising. Foreign exchange reserves were under stress. But my sense is that
We had the two
uh,
oil shocks.
there were oil shocks. So, you cannot just put the blame on just the Bangladesh war. A combination of factors contributed to the poor state of finances for the center during those days. And I think that situation got from bad to worse till around, I would say, 79, 80, and then you got those the IMF loan or whatever decisions that happened. But then that gets into my second volume.
Yeah. Now, you've seen this entire period, first 30 years of independence, unbroken rule by the Congress Party.
Yes, that was
Yet
one of
you
the reasons
see,
why I chose that period.
yeah. So you see the finance ministers of the same party, their views on economic policy the way they respond to external developments and pressures, and how the party responds to the response of the finance minister. You've seen how these actually shape up. Would you say there was a homogeneity of views within the Congress, or there was, any ideological dictatorship within the party that compelled everybody to toe a particular line?
No, I think the the party and the government or the finance ministers, they don't always agree with each other. They would take the classic the bank nationalization case. The party was clear that it should be the social control of banks as an instrument that should be implemented first, and should be experimented and then see its impact. As a matter of fact, that famous Bangalore convention of the All India Congress Committee, where Morarji Desai, made a strong defense of social control of banks and criticized the idea of bank nationalization. Now, remember that, and that's a big difference, that in a party forum, Indira Gandhi is discussing the idea of bank nationalization and finding out that the party is not in favor of it. So what does she do? What she did was something very novel and something that modern day leaders don't even think of. Is she said that all right, the party does not favor bank nationalization, but let me add my resolution and let it be an addendum to the party declaration. So the Bangalore AICC convention ended, perhaps for the first time, a party declaration, and then an addendum was given, a statement was added that this is what the Prime Minister wanted believed. So the main resolution was against bank nationalization, but the Prime Minister's note on bank nationalization was added. Now, since then, and that meeting in Bangalore happened in June, from June to July, and by July 19th, she decided not only to get rid of her finance minister, but also to decide that she will have her own president. Number three, she got the bank nationalization passed, even though her economic affairs secretary IG Patel was opposed to it. So you would see a perfect play of politics, internal discussion, dissent, and yet the prime minister and the finance minister deciding the things the way they want to do it. Now, you will see that in the modern day era these days, you don't see that kind of a discussion and debate even within the party forum. So my assessment is that even under Mrs. Gandhi, forget about Nehru, there was an element of discussion and debate over major economic policy decisions, which we are unfortunately losing touch with, and we are not seeing it anymore.
Okay, I must intervene here. We just got about 13 minutes left. In fact,
Okay.
11 minutes now. And we
Okay.
have some questions from our audience. And for those who are listening, in case you have some questions, please send a WhatsApp to 98375 72215, and we will try to take the questions as we get along. So, as of now, we have some questions, and I'll read those questions to you. One of them is very interesting. It says that, is there any anecdote that you missed in the book which you feel now that you should have written about? Because after having written the book, you may have got some feedback. That's one question. The second one is about how long has it taken you to write this book? From the beginning to the start. So these are two questions that have come just now, and we expect some more to happen. So, and if there are more questions, we'll be happy to engage with you. and then of course
Sure.
TK can ask one or two more
No,
questions.
I mean on anecdotes, I don't think I have come across any more anecdotes for this part, this volume one. But of course, on the second question on how long did I take, I think COVID was one of the reasons why was a help in that sense, because during COVID days you had more time at your disposal, uh, and during those interregnum when you could move out and meet people and sit in the libraries, whether it is the Nehru Memorial Library or whether it is even the India International Center Library is very good in my view. I could do that. So I took about 2.5 years or so to complete the three volume. I've written all the three volumes, so they, as I say, so it took about 2.5 years. Yeah.
Okay, one more question, which is on a general plane. I mean,
Yeah.
have the finance ministry records been declassified? Have they been sent to the National Archive or not yet? Because MHA has not sent its records after 1965. The Ministry of Defense has not sent in its records again from the 60s. So how is the finance ministry compared to these other ministries insofar as declassifying the records is concerned, and whether those records are now easily available to researchers at the
I,
national.
I will tell you, I will tell you something. I think some reports are available, but accessing them is next to impossible, because when you go and ask for a specific issue, you are required to present certain references which can be processed. So the only way that I could access these old records was in a few cases I used the RTI, the Right to Information Act, and in other cases I had to rely on exchange of letters of finance ministers with the prime ministers, which are available.
In the Nehru Memorial, now the Pradhan Mantri Memorial.
Correct.
And I think the three of us would agree, and so would our listeners, that it's very important for our country to open up the records, because it's
Absolutely.
very, very difficult to
Absolutely.
to do
There's no
research.
doubt about it.
If you do not have the records, and all over the world records after 40 years are being declassified, and so I think it's high time that at least records, now that we're in 2023, at least records up to 1982 can be opened up, even if the government wants to hold on to some of the current records. I think I don't know what benefits. I mean, of course, I'm a former civil servant, so I mean, you can both grill me on why the government does it, but I personally feel that these records should be open, and if we open up these records, it will help research. I mean, it'll help us to understand why decisions were taken the way they were taken, and it'll probably be good for us. TK, I'm just
Can I,
waiting for. I'll
can,
just check
can
my
I,
WhatsApp.
can I, can I, an anecdote which came to my came to my knowledge
Yeah.
after the publication of the book
Hmm.
pertains to John Mathai,
Hmm.
and it came from Mr. Mathai's family. Actually, I happened to meet. I mean, because of the book, the family got in. I had not known that the family is. So his grandson got in touch with me, and he revealed me one anecdote which struck me, and I can share it. Maybe if the book has a second edition reprint, I would like to include it there, which is about the government's permission to John Mathai to join the Tatas after he quit as a finance minister. Uh, you know, there
The
was
cooling period, yeah, the cooling off for ministers.
There was some delay, and this was something that was became a slight bone of contention. So, what I'm trying to say is that many years later, and I see when uh, when B.G. Deshmukh wanted to join the Tatas, Chandrasekhar government denied him the permission.
Oh,
So there is, and if you look back, there are people who joined. So you have one John Mathai who could not join the Tatas immediately, and you have got a B.G. Deshmukh who was only a cabinet secretary, and his prime minister said, "Sorry, you cannot join the Tatas." So governments finally don't change, even though.
No, no, but our current foreign minister was given immediate permission to join the Tata. So it's not that
Absolutely,
don't
absolutely.
change the review. But I must mention one thing. I was delivering the BG Deshmukh Memorial, the 11th BG Deshmukh Memorial lecture
Yes,
in Pune. And that started, they were to read up on BG Deshmukh, and BG Deshmukh has devoted a chapter to CD Deshmukh, in which he
yes,
says that CD Deshmukh was the person who said that civil servants must write. They must write the records because
yes,
this is the only way in which an authentic record will be available to the next
yeah,
generations. And
yeah,
the fact that the governments may not open up their archives, but civil servants must reflect and refer to whatever they can recall. That's very
yeah,
important. So TK, ask your last question while I go to my WhatsApp.
yeah. So, AKB,
yeah.
when you went through the records, did you get a chance to look at the parliamentary debates on the budget or other policies announced by the finance minister? How intelligent or involved or responsive were our parliamentarians to proposals from the ministry?
I think the debates that I accessed on the budget debates were very, very ordinary. The quality of debates, at least for the first 30 years. And those debates did not really touch upon the critical key issues. But debates on other economic policy matters in Parliament were very rich, very, very varied, and were very useful. For example, the debate on the Mundra scandal is an eye opener, where the prime minister's son-in-law opened the debate on the involvement of his father-in-law's finance minister T K Krishnamachari, and he was at it till the end, till T K Krishnamachari quit. And and it's very interesting that Nehru was very deeply hurt by this attack on his finance minister. So even though he accepted his resignation, he made sure that he got his defense minister Krishna Menon to accompany him to see him off at the airport as a public display. That and lo and behold, T. Krishnamachari was back in the government after a few years, and Nehru brought him back. My biggest finding in this entire research thing was Nehru was a man of many parts, but Nehru also behaved in many issues that were pretty controversial, like his criticism of MC Chagla, who was holding the inquiry into his finance minister in an open forum, was questioned by Nehru. But Chagla held his own. He said, "Sorry, I will decide to hold this session open, and I don't care whether the prime minister is unhappy or not." So I'm saying that was a different era. It was an open society in a way, open politics. Prime minister is not liking it. The inquiry chairman is continuing to do it. He submits the report in 1 month. The prime minister accepts the resignation, but even after the resignation, prime minister decides to show his support of his former finance minister and sees him off at the airport. So I find that this is great.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, we would have loved to go on, but there are only 4 seconds left, and in 4 seconds, all I can do is to thank both AKB and TK that we've had a lovely conversation. We just don't know how this 1 hour went by,
Yeah.
and therefore this is the mark of a great conversation. There are some questions which I'll send to you on the email,
Sure.
AKB, and you can
Sure.
address them on the email. Thank you, TK. Thank you, AKB. Thank you,
Thank you,
Technopack.
Sanjeev. Thank you,
Fair
Arun. Thank you.
Observer.
Thank you. It was great.
NGC,
Bye.
Incredible, Sochcast, Cello, and REC for supporting us. Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
And we look forward to your next book. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.